Yo, what's up everyone? How we feeling? How's everybody doing today? On a Monday, March 23rd. AKA with ears to see and eyes to hear day, in my opinion. Crazy things have been going on. I know that a lot of states have done this lockdown thing going on right now, and Oregon has just kind of released a shelter-in-place act, which means that people weren't following the nice, ordinary guidelines of stay in your house. So now the mayor has put a shelter-in-place act, which means you can only go to the store or get necessary things to survive. Otherwise, you have to stay in place, or you get a misdemeanor or something like that. And it's necessary because I want it to stop everything that's going on, but it's silly to me that it takes something like that in order for people to realize that this is a real thing, whether we like to admit it or not. It's not going to stop unless we follow the rules and the guidelines, and it's not a time to be anti-following the guidelines. I think everybody would love to be able to go back to work and have the normal part of their life back, and until people decide that they're not above the shit that's going on, we have to basically be grounded to our fucking houses. And I find it kind of irritating that human beings just can't seem to get their shit together. And I know that a lot of people are as frustrated as I am, but here we are in this situation, and that's all I'm going to say about that, because I'd like to get into something that's a really positive thing for me, which is this album that started this whole opportunity for me to sing and be in a band and be happy to do what I love. And I put together a really awesome podcast, I think, today. It's funny because I write it down on my iPad and I just use it as a guideline, but I ended up writing so much shit on here that I'm going to mainly just be reading it off of this iPad. And I'll see if I can add things as I read along. But yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So I'm going to get into it now. I'm going to wait a few more minutes because I did send out that I was going to be starting around 3. But yeah, it was really cool to get a call from Alternative Press. I had no idea that the 10-year anniversary was going to be today. So thankful that they reminded me that it has been 10 years since the album has come out. It brought back a lot of memories because honestly, I hadn't listened to this album in I don't even know how many years from start to finish. Obviously, we play a couple of the songs off this album, but not entirely all of them. And so to go back and listen to them and to listen to myself 10 years earlier was a trip. And it was a lot of fun, and it brought back a lot of emotions and funny stories. So as I break down each song, which I was talking about on Twitter and Instagram, I'm going to be talking about the stories that it brings back more so than all the lyrics, but they're in there too. But there's a lot of funny shit that I remembered that I think that you guys will get a kick out of from this time period. So, all right, I'm going to make sure I'm recording. I'm going to put these headphones on. I don't know why, because I can hear myself talk just fine, but I guess because it makes me feel like I'm more pro. And we'll kick this off. So before I jump into this, I want to give a massive thank you to all the people that were involved in it. That means the original members that were in the studio during this time. So Nick, Brandon, Gabe, and Justin, I want to say thank you to you. I want to say thank you to Cameron Mizell, who produced this album. And I'll talk more about him as we continue on. But a huge shout out to Cameron for not only producing this album and believing in me as a singer, but also this band enough to pitch us to Rise Records and get us a deal based off Craig Erickson basically just believing in Cameron and trusting his opinion on us is huge. So thank you, my dude. Also thank you to Rise Records for taking on this band and letting us be a part of a monumental era, in my opinion. That's a whole nother podcast in itself to talk about all the Rise bands and the time period that we kind of started and kicked it off. But holy shit, I just want to say thank you to everyone. And we'll just kick it off like that. So I titled this podcast 10 Years to With Ears, and the subject is a look back at the album that started it all. I have like a little pre-thing that I wrote, and then we'll just kind of dive into each song. So I remember getting off the plane at the Orlando International Airport. I remember like yesterday not knowing that it would be my home for many months, that I'd be rehearsing with a band that I'd still be in 10 years from now. I remember our apartment in Altamont Springs. I remember waiting on Cameron Mizell to finally get to the studio every day. Cameron, you know what I'm talking about. In Winter Park, I remember buying our first 15-passenger van at some weird farmhouse in the middle of nowhere that was used previously as a prisoner transport van. That's a true story. And it still had all the bars on the windows that we had to figure out how to get off so that we could drive it around without prison bars on the windows. Let's see. I remember eating Qdoba for lunch and Hungry Howie's pizza at night because that's all we could afford. I remember surviving on Arizona sweet tea. I remember introducing Justin Hills to weed for the very first time and watching his reaction as he ate Doritos with his newly weed-enhanced taste buds. Shout out to Justin. Because I pretty much kickstarted his whole life with weed. He had never smoked before that. I remember practicing in a storage unit. I remember using Tabit, this program back in the day, to record songs, which we'll get into later. The one thing I didn't completely remember was the album itself. So to look back on this album, the one that started it all, was an amazing experience. I listened to it this morning as I went on my run. And I'm going to break down the tracks by some of the lyrics and also the experiences that they brought on. And so let's kick it off. Let's start with the very first track. If I'm James Dean, you're Audrey Hepburn. I wrote down, first of all, I want to say sorry to all the nervous fans during meet and greet who nervously try to tell us that this song is what got them into Sleeping with Sirens. I know that If I'm James Dean, you're Audrey Hepburn, under the circumstances, is a tongue twister. So I just want to let you guys know that as funny as it is to hear you guys try to say the name, I understand that it is hard to to say that one when you're feeling nervous. So I apologize. The title itself, so the reason it's called If I'm James Dean, you're Audrey Hepburn, is I would jokingly tell my wife that I'm as handsome as James Dean just to be an ass, which I am. And she would reply that if I was James Dean, that she was Audrey Hepburn. So that's how the title became what it is. And since it is a love song and it is about her, I found it fitting at the time, and it still rings true today. So the lyrics that I wrote down are, they say that love is forever. And I'm here 10 years later. 10 years later in album time, 12 years later for her and I's relationship. And although this song was written from a young love perspective, meaning like, you know, being young and in love and having those first emotions, because I think that we were only together for about a year and a half before I went to Florida to write this record. All the obstacles in between and everything that happens in a relationship, it was nice to listen back to this song and realize how pure the intent was, you know, for this song, and the fact that it is a love song. I remember writing specifically this song on a rainy Florida night and calling Caitlin after I wrote it and telling her that I wrote a song for her, having no idea that it would be one of our biggest songs ever. But it's a song about missing someone you love and not knowing when you would see them again. I can show you what my dreams are made of as I'm dreaming of your face. I don't think words can express your beauty. It's singing to me. Yeah, guys, I just think that honestly this song is sweet to me. It makes me feel good about how I was feeling and how I was able to express this song. And I'm glad that it rings true for a lot of people in their relationship. I know that a lot of people say that it is their song, and people have gotten married to this song or had their first dance to this song. And that's really special to me because, you know, it's tough to write a love song that feels genuine, and this one to me still does. And it's been re-recorded as an acoustic song. It's been re-recorded in a live version on our Live and Unplugged album, and each time it feels special still. So I'm really happy with this one a lot, and it's one that we will still play for as long as we can. So we tried to retire it to the dismay of our fans, but there's nothing that we can do. James, you old boy, your forever is all that I need. I know, it's cute, right? That's mostly for Jack Fowler, because he and I have talked many, many times about like, dude, I don't want to play this song anymore. That's Jack's voice. Dude, I don't want to play this song anymore. But every time we try to retire it, people would complain. So it's like one of those things where it doesn't feel old to play this song. I don't know why we would even ever try to retire it. It feels nice, and it brings this energy into the room, because there would be nights that we wouldn't play it. So it was almost like a toss-up. We're going to play the song or not. And every time we did, fans would be very, very excited that we would. I have some side notes that I put for each song. So the first side note that I have is, during the early Rise era, we toured with some pretty heavy bands. Bands like Emmure, for example. And I wrote, I was astonished to watch dudes, after we were done, beating the literal shit out of people in the mosh pit. Like, literally just like turning and punching people, being in the front row during our band set and singing the words to If I'm James Dean, You're Audrey Hepburn, arm in arm with some other big scary person. And I love that about this song. I love that it was able to connect a community of music, you know, where it's like people could come to the show and listen to a band like Emmure. And at the time, I'm thinking, how the fuck can we tour with this band? How does this ever make sense? And maybe it doesn't make as much sense now, but back then it wasn't crazy to do something like that. To me, I was like, how are we going to do this? But to see some of the bigger, scary dudes that were going there to blow off steam, which I understand now, and to get rid of the anger that they had, stand arm in arm with either their girlfriend or their best friend and sing these words, made me feel really cool, because I think that it's a song that, again, expresses real and honest love, and it makes me happy. So there's James Dean, guys. I'm going to take a drink of my LaCroix real quick. Before we move on to track 2, which is the bomb.com version 2.0. I think the track title was coined by Mr. Justin Hills, because he would constantly tell us in the band that he was the bomb.com. And one of the original demos produced by Cameron and the group of original, I wrote a group of original misfit Florida kids trying to be the new It Scene band, and one skinny, not quite yet emo wannabe, Kellin, recorded the track again for the actual Rise release. So we had an original bomb.com, which I'm sure you can find on YouTube. We re-recorded the bomb.com, so that's why it's called bomb.com version 2.0. If you didn't know that, I'm sure you probably already knew that. So to dive into the lyrics, it's a spiritual driven song. It's all for the sake of love. It's all for you. You know, my band at the time never claimed to be a Christian band. We'd be accused of it a lot, and rightfully so, because I came from a Christian background before the band began, and I was in a Christian acoustic project called Closer to Closure. Justin and Gabe were in a band called For All We Know, which was a Christian, metalcore band, and I sang a song with them called Jesus in the Southern Sky. So there was a history there, and some of the lyrics from the time of this album are spiritually driven. So as much as we would deny that we were a Christian band, I don't know why we would, because technically we weren't a Christian band. I don't want to say that we were, but there was a lot of those lyrics coming out of me because of my background and where I came from. I think the worst curse word I say on With Ears to See and Eyes to Hear album as a whole is damn. And of course, I say the word fuck a lot more now. So you could tell the difference between there and now. But it makes me laugh because it came at a time where I was still naive to the world. I hadn't really experienced traveling anywhere. I mean, it was like my first time in Florida and really getting out of the state of Oregon. I've been to Michigan and California, but that had been it. So This was before my heart was a little bit hardened. And also this song would teach me how to scream. I wrote down, although pretty sure I was doing it wrong. And absolutely, now that I'm thinking about it, I was, because during those first few shows, after playing a whole entire set, I would cough up and spit blood. But after working with Melissa Cross, thanks Melissa Cross, I would become better at screaming, and now I don't hurt my voice when I do it. And so that was like the first time I'd ever blended singing and screaming before, because prior to that, I was just doing acoustic, softer shit, and this was the first time I did anything heavier. But it was fun. I listened to bands like Under Oath, and I listened to bands like Finch and The Used, and I always wanted to scream in a band, so this was my first chance at doing it, and I still love doing it to this day. Also, I wanted to put another side note on here, and it is, I wanted to write down, I still have faith and I still believe in something. I know we all don't have the same beliefs, and that's okay. But what I do believe in is compassion and the love that music brings to our community, and the fact that it doesn't matter where you come from or what you believe in at our shows. One thing that we have in common is that we all have a genuine love and support for each other. I love that while doing the AP article, Paige said that one thing she noticed at our shows is that when someone falls down, everyone's there to pick each other up. Yeah, we have mosh pits, but it's not as crazy as like an Amir mosh pit, but it still gets pretty gnarly, but we all take care of each other and make sure that everyone is there to have a good time and to have a good feeling. And that's something I love about you guys and have always loved. So thank you so much. Moving on to track 3, and I'm trying to go through this a little bit quickly so we have some good questions and stuff at the end, because this could have been like a 3-hour podcast and live stream, so I kind of broke it down to be as short as possible. But anyways, track 3, You Kill Me in a Good Way. I wrote, tuck your privates private, holy high note kicks this song off. And man, is that true. I remember this song kicking off and just being in the booth and hitting that first note and surprising myself, the rest of the guys in the band, and also Cameron in the booth. And somebody had tweeted the other day that is something that kind of aspired them to sing high. I had a fun time listening back to this song and just remembering trying to hit that note live back then and having a really difficult time, because we were using monitors and it was already hard enough to hear. And some nights we had the worst sound anyways, and we were playing VFW halls, and we had the shittiest monitors on stage. So I remember that there'd be nights where I think we were on, I know that we were on tour with We Came as Romans for our first tour, and asking the guys in the band, how did I sound when I hit that song tonight? And they'd always be honest and be like, or dude, you did a good job. So I wrote here that a younger me had no idea what to really do with the genre of music. True. I only based what I knew on bands that I listened to. I'd never played in a band like Sleeping with Sirens before. True. The original 2 guitar players, Nick and Brandon, would go off in separate rooms. True. And bring me songs that essentially had 2 lead guitar parts. And that's something that a lot of people that listen to this album will say, we missed that sound from you guys. Well, the reason that sound was like that was because we had Brandon and Nick, who both wanted to be lead guitar players, and they would go into separate rooms and they would play these different fucking parts, and then they would bring them back into the studio or to me and say, here you go, Kellin, write something to this. And I had to learn to literally write over 2 dueling guitar parts, which I think is what makes this album really special, but also made it really challenging for me as a songwriter and to come up with melodies, because half the time I would get shit and I'd be like, what the fuck is going on here? And I would have to just kind of make a chorus out of something or a verse out of something, which definitely shows in With Ears to See and Eyes to Hear, which we'll get to down toward the bottom. But this song is about being insecure. That's what the lyrics to me are about. And that rings true when it comes to the guitar parts and me being insecure about how to write to them. And also just the 2 dudes in the band previously never really being like, Kellin, this is really fucking good, man, what you did. They always were just kind of cool or whatever. I never really got this is awesome, unless it was from Justin, Justin's always been really good about being like, dude, that song gave me chills. But he was basically like the only dude in the band that would be like, hey man, this is really good, until Cameron Mizell took the songs and kind of doctored them up and made them all make sense. And afterwards they'd be like, holy shit, we have something here. And I wrote down, I owe a lot to Cameron Mizell for taking the mess that he was delivered and making it make sense, not only to me, but for everyone who listens to it now. So shout out Cameron for taking random guitar parts and helping make it a functional song for me to sing to. And I know that this song specifically is a lot of people's favorite track. Would love to resurface this one day. And I wrote at the end, don't worry, I tried hitting the note at the beginning, hit it perfectly, still got it, maybe even better than ever. So there you go, guys. Moving on. Let Love Bleed Red. Actually, I'm going to take a drink first. Dry. By the way, doing these podcasts has been really, really good for my self-esteem, because for some reason doing podcasts makes me a lot more nervous than getting on stage and singing. I've found to be in front of a bunch of people watching, and that's why I kind of chose to do this on a live stream and not just record it myself, because it puts pressure on me to be able to speak better in front of an audience under pressure and just kind of thinking on the spot. So thank you guys for being open to watching and listening to this. But yeah, so let's move on. Let Love Bleed Red. Originally a Closer to Closure track. I wanted to give a shout out to the boys at Rise. So Craig, Sean, and Matthew, if you're watching this, shout out to you guys. This album, With Years of Seeing Eyes Here, was originally planned to be an EP, but as Rise got hold of it midway through, they wanted a full length. We only had a certain amount of rent money on the apartment we were living in and time in the studio. So crunch time and find songs was the formula. So this song was one that I thought that I could take from the Closer to Closure tracks as a middle of the road song and restructure it to fit on this album. And I love this song. This song actually made me cry today when I listened to it. Because number one, I think it's beautiful. And I hadn't listened to this record in so long. So to hear this one and to hear where it started in an acoustic version, to get to Sleeping with Sirens was amazing. I reworked the second verse, so that's different. And then also it made me cry because it features one of my favorite singers of all time, Mr. Aaron Marsh from the band Copeland. I love that band enough to name my daughter after them. And yeah, I was listening to it, and specifically his part. He wrote, "Oh, here where we lie, outstretched to wonder why we don't belong. You deserve much more, and I'll give until I'm all gone." Guys, I've never really had a guest vocal come from somebody where I haven't been like, I've got some notes. I'm very, very critical of the songs that we write. And I'm very, very like hard pressed to not give parts away, because I like to do as much as I can with the song. So when I do give a part away, I want it to come back more special with whoever brings something to the table. And this is the one time specifically, probably because I'm such a fan of Aaron Marsh, but where it came back and I'm like, holy shit, like it made the song for me, and it still does make the song for me. And I wanted to note that, you know, Aaron Marsh, when I reached out to him, I think probably DM'd him over MySpace at the time. He had never heard me or this band, and all he had to reference was Big Gulps and thebomb.com. And I know that you know the difference between my band and Copeland. So to hear that and go like, I wonder what kind of fucking song this guy's going to send me. It made me happy to know how much faith he had in me to give this a shot. And so I want to say thank you to Aaron Marsh for being a part of it. This song's beautiful. I would love to rework this and play it in an acoustic setting. And me and Aaron have never done this song together. So hopefully someday when we're in Florida, he can come out and lend his vocals. I think that would be an amazing experience live. My side note for this track is Aaron Marsh also appears, if you didn't know, on Under Oath's Some Will Seek Forgiveness, Others Escape, off their album They're Only Chasing Safety. And it's one of my favorite features as well. I love that freaking song. It's the last song on the album, and if you haven't heard it, please listen to it. It's a great part. It's a great song. So thanks, Aaron, again. I'm moving on. The next song, Captain Tying Knots versus Mr. Walkway No Way. Named after a viral YouTube video, Drinking Out of Cups. If you've never seen that YouTube video, it was a really weird, acid trippy YouTube video. And we took the name of that and thought it would be really cool to have it be a track title. I wrote, this is probably the heaviest song on the album, and it features some truly amazing guitar work by Mr. Brandon McMaster. I don't know if he's watching this, but I will have it in the story. Like all the sweeping shit that he did on this song is incredible to listen back through. He really fucking brought this song to life, and I know that a lot of people spent time trying to figure out how to play all that stuff on guitar. I wrote down, it was fun for me to blend melody and screams with this track, and also it features Mr. David Stevens from We Came as Romans on the track, who at the time, and still is like somebody that I look up to a lot. I think he's a really, really phenomenal frontman and also vocalist, and he's grown immensely just in being able to go from screaming to singing and doing both at the same time. It says here that We Came as Romans had one of the biggest albums in the scene at the time. While we were creating this record, To Plant a Seed was one that we'd listen to constantly and take notes from because we had no idea what we were doing as a band. So that album was one of the biggest ones at the time. And so we took a lot of notes from those guys. And to have Dave come on the track and be a part of it is huge for me. So thank you. And also thank you, WeCar, for bringing us on our first ever tour. I remember laughing a ton with you guys. I love all of you. Thinking back on all of our shenanigans, maybe Miss Kyle, want to say rest in peace. And I just also just want to say that when the world picks up again, I hope that we can maybe play some shows together like old times. I think it would be a lot of fun because I know that you guys had to stand your tour down, and it would be nice to maybe play a couple shows together. So that would be awesome. Specific memories that come to mind, because I didn't really have a lot to say about this song in general, but I did have a lot of things to say about just stories that I remember from that initial first tour with We Came as Romans. So my band and WeCar would compete every single night on that tour to see who could sell the most merch at the end of the night. I don't know if Justin remembers this, but it was a lot of fun. But anyways, we would stand up on the tables and we would try to sway fans to buy our shirts instead of WeCar, and they would do the same to us. And we'd get into characters and we'd use these like businessman voices or like almost like carnival salesman like people's voices and scream really loud and obnoxiously at all the fans to try to get them to laugh. And it was a lot of fun. It didn't really matter what we sold as far as merchandise. It was just a lot of fun to go there and to just be weird and funny. And those guys are some of the most hilarious dudes I've ever met. And it really brought out a lot of fun on tour. Second memory is the band Broadway, which Jack Fowler used to be a part of. I saw that he was in this, so I'm glad you're here, bud, because I've got some stories to tell about you. Broadway, which provided me the introduction to Mr. Jack Fowler, which, by the way, I love you, Jack. They had an album called Kingdoms, also produced by Mr. Cameron Mizell, which we will dive into later with a funny correlation. But I just wanted to say that there was two things in common with Broadway and Sleeping with Sirens, and that was the fact that they shared a guitar player named Nick, and I think Brandon had something to do with Broadway as well. I'm not sure. Jack can clarify that. But anyways, Nick was kicked out of Broadway, and despite the band Broadway, started Sleeping with Sirens. So there's a little bit of a history for you. Recruited me and then left the band after one tour. So I remember being on this tour with We Came as Romans, having Nick as my guitar player, and knowing that he was in Broadway and that Broadway would be on the tour as well. And I remember playing the first show in Atlanta. I I can't remember the venue. Can't remember the name of it. I'm sure that Jack can also clarify because he remembers all that shit. But I remember the whole band, Broadway, standing in the middle of the room. There wasn't a massive amount of kids at this show, but I could specifically see them, as I was already nervous to sing these songs for the very first time, just standing there with their arms crossed like this, watching everything, as I nervously went through telling the worst stories, trying to tell jokes and not being funny at all, and literally blowing it as a first impression to try to get back at this band that had kicked out the guitar player at the time. It ended up bringing me and Jack together, but it is a lot of fun to think back on that time. And I remember Jack wouldn't talk to me at all until I did some funny shit. He laughed, and then we became really, really good friends at that point. And eventually he came to be a part of this band. So good to have you, Jack. Fun story. Next brings us to Don't Fall Asleep at the Helm. This song was originally meant to be an interlude. And if you don't remember this era, this Rise Records era, or this time, for some reason, bands thought it was cool to put a fucking interlude on an album. And as pretty as interludes are, and as cool as it is to hear music with keyboards and shit like that on it, who the fuck wants to listen to an interlude? Just saying. Who does? Who wants to listen to it? I'm sure so many people skipped over interludes. This song was supposed to be an interlude and wasn't supposed to have vocals until Craig at Rise Records, thanks Craig, said, dude, please put some vocals on that because interludes are stupid. And I agreed. So here we go. So what happened with this song was Cameron had to leave for the night. I don't remember what song we were working on, but he had this structured out to be an interlude. And we were staying in an apartment together, and me and Brandon decided to stay at the studio because Cameron would let us sleep there sometimes to just kind of get some space from the rest of the guys. And I asked Cameron if he would set up the microphone in the booth and if Brandon could just hit record. And so we stayed up all night recording the vocals and writing to this song. And then Cameron came back in the morning and edited everything and put it all together. This was also a song that literally was written, like I just said, randomly so that we could make enough songs to go on the album. But if we would have had time to structure a record and have time to put 10 or 11 songs on, I don't think that this song ever would have made the cut. So I'm kind of happy that we did have that time frame and that time crunch, because out of it came a really awesome song. And my side note here, not to be a cool brag, this is a true story, and I'm only saying it because I think it's funny and it reminds me of this. So here we go. Post Malone told me one time that he loves this song so much that it was his favorite song for almost a year. That's a true story. Not saying that to be cool, saying it because it's real. So maybe y'all can take this little message, hit him up on Twitter since we're all just sitting home not doing nothing, and maybe he can do a cover of it, because I would love to hear him sing over it, because he said it's one of his favorites of all time, and I think he would make it sound fucking awesome. So shout out to Posty. Hope you're doing good. Little side story there, a little back history. Take another drink. Hope you guys are having fun so far. I'm kind of blowing through this, but there's a lot of stuff to say. So at the end, we'll take a collective breath, and then we'll talk a little bit about what I've been saying about all these. Hopefully they're all sinking in and you guys are getting something out of it. If not, this podcast will be edited and will be out at some point for you to listen to later. So we're moving on to With Ears to See and Eyes to Hear. Jack, are you still in this chat? Just want to see real quick if he is. I need confirmation of Jack, because this is specifically about him. And I think this is going to blow his mind. Jack, hit me with a comment. Whatever. If not, he can watch it later. I think he left, it says. Probably so. Anyways, With Ears to See and Eyes to Hear, the title track of the album, I said, remember when I was going to talk about Broadway again, so here you go. This song, With Ears to See and Eyes to Hear, started off as a diss track to Broadway. It's taken on a very different form today, but I find it hilarious that Jack Fowler has played the song with me live, acoustically, and also recorded his lead guitars over the acoustic version of this song, not knowing that this song was previously about his old band. Lyrics: forgiveness, this taste all but poisons my mouth. I scream, but nothing will come out. You've gone too far. Literally, I'm trying to stick up for Nick being kicked out of the band and, again, trying to spite this band Broadway. More blatantly, it says here, I'll be there to see the tower you fall from. This kingdom isn't quite what it may seem. You're an illusion. You'll never be king. Broadway's album was called Kingdoms. On the front of it, there was a castle with a tower. So there you fucking go. I wrote a diss track about Jack and his band. And I wrote down here as the side notes that Jake, the drummer of Broadway, would go on to drum for Memphis Mayfire. If you didn't know that, Jake, who drums for Memphis Mayfire, was in Broadway. Jack would ultimately join my band, and after Let's Cheers to This, which Jack recorded on, I'd go on to write King for a Day with Pierce the Veil. So in hindsight, I was fucking right. Sorry, dude. You'll never be king. Never, brah. Not in Broadway, but in this band you will. So there's a little funny backstory. I had a really fun time writing that part. It was a lot of fun. Also, want to say shout out to Broadway and that album Kingdoms, because it was fucking awesome. And if you haven't listened to it, it is a lot of fun. Go back and listen to that one. Jack did some amazing guitar work on that record. And, Jake's a great drummer, so it was cool to listen to that album. And it was a blast. So let's see here. Okay, so now we're on to, in case of emergency, dial 411. I wrote down both this song and the last song on the record were the last to be written for the album. So we literally had to come up with 2 more songs, and these were the last ones written. So Brandon had them programmed previously on something called Tabit, which, if you're not familiar with Tabit, which I don't know why you would be at this point, but a lot of people who maybe are watching this did tour around this time and use Tabit. What Tabit was essentially is you would write out the notes to what you wanted to play, and it would structure them as guitar. The funny thing is that it made everything sound like a Sega video game or like an old NES or something like that. So every time Brandon would play a song that he had on Tabit, I would laugh. I'd be like, this sounds so stupid. But in turn, I will say that the left side of Everywhere to me still sounds like Tabit, but in case of emergency, this one turned out really cool. I think the lyrics to this song spoke to me today because I feel like they ring true with what we face right now. I wrote, there's hope for you tonight. I am for you. Don't give up. Just believe. I'll be right by your side. And I think that it's amazing that music has a way of speaking to us, even though it was written in a different place and for a completely different specific reason. We can listen back to it and it can speak to us in the time that we have right now. And so that's what I wrote about that one, guys. And lastly, the left side of Everywhere, I'm going to give a shout out to Brandon for an amazing guitar solo. Jack claims it as being his favorite song on the album. It's a song about believing in your dreams and making your dreams come true. And I wrote, in closing, with ears to see and eyes to hear, is an album that shaped a few young, bright-eyed dudes, brought band members from unlikely places together, spanned an era from one of the biggest scene labels, and set up a lasting career for myself and the rest of the guys that will go on a lifetime. I want to thank all the original members, Nick, Gabe, Brandon, Justin. Thank you to Jack, Nick Martin, and Maddie for continuing to push this band forward. So, yeah, with ears to see and eyes to hear, thank you for the 10 years, and here's to many more. Thank you, guys. That's all I had for this. I'm going to go on and answer some questions right now if you have any at all. Dance Party. Sorry. Dance Party was an interlude track. We ended up putting one on there just to make it 10. And there used to be a link on the physical CD, and I'm sure that someone can find it and post on Twitter, but there's a funny video of me and the guys making a ridiculous dance video, and that's why it's called Dance Party. It's not an actual track, so that's why I didn't put it on the list. But anyways, thank you guys. I'm going to answer some questions, and and we'll see what happens. Let's see what happens. Waiting for it. How did me and Justin meet? Someone wants to know. So there's an All Press article that was released today that also talks about the With Ears to See and Eyes to Hear album, and it's all in there. It's a really, really long story, so I'm going to pass that question on to just read that article, and it'll tell you about that. But yeah, it's a funny story. What's my favorite song from the track? Or what's my favorite song from the album? I'd have to say that If I'm James Dean, You're Audrey Hepburn is my favorite song on the album, just because I think that it's the most important track on the album, and it's one that we still play all the time. And I like the sentiment in the lyrics, and I like that it still makes sense for our band, even right now. Next question. Other than, hey, can you come back here to this place and play a show? And I'm trying to, worst show story. Worst show story. Man, that's a good one. There's a couple. I mean, there's plenty of times our band had blown it playing live and fucked up like either a song or a part. I know that Jack would probably say the worst story would be when we stopped at Warped Tour in the middle of our set and literally had to there's no way to come back from it. So we had to stop the song and completely start over. And that was pretty embarrassing. But I'd say that for me, probably the worst thing that's ever happened to me at a show was getting hit in the face with a guitar in Denver. And, having it cut almost my eye out and split my eye right here. And I remember just looking down at my hand and just seeing a bunch of blood and not knowing if my eye was out or not. But finishing the set bleeding on everyone I thought was a real hardcore thing to do. So of course I did that. And then I had to go to the hospital afterwards and get stitches. And they gave me painkillers, which knocked me out for the night. And I woke up in the van on the way to Salt Lake City to our tour manager, Garrett, at the time, driving down a 2-track dirt road, and me bouncing in the back and being what the fuck's going on? Waking up completely in some sort of painkiller coma and being where the fuck are we? And Garrett saying, there's a gas station up here. I'm have you looked around? There's nothing. We're in the middle of nowhere on a dirt road with a trailer attached that's going to drag ass and drag the bottom. And Justin getting very mad because we were almost empty, literally nowhere near a gas station, somehow finding one, and then continuing on to the show. But that was my worst story, live performance story. Someone said, is there a moment where you can pinpoint that time and everything changed for you? Yeah, I talked about that the other day too, just based on seeing when you start off in a band, you see the growth at a different perspective because you're not used to seeing so many people at a show, and then all of a sudden there's people there. So that was always something that kind of let me know that what we were doing was working. But one thing that I forgot to kind of talk about with this whole podcast was that what I love about this album and what kind of correlates it to me to our most recent album is when you are in a place where you have no expectations, you write the best shit, I think. I had no idea what was going to happen with this album. I had no idea that 10 years from now it would fucking matter. I just knew that it was important for me to do something because I wanted to make it in music, and this was the vessel that was going to get me there. I had no idea that I'd be in this band still. I had no idea that all these plaques behind me would be a real thing. So in turn, I just wrote whatever I was thinking, and I didn't care about it as much. Over time, as people started to give a shit, then you start to second guess everything you do. What I love about this record is that it's pure, and it just was literally word vomit out of my mouth. Didn't matter. I had music and I had words, and they came together. And I think the same thing happened with our most recent album, because I didn't really know if the band was going to keep going at this point. And so as music came, it was a natural thing because at the end of the day, it didn't matter if the band continued or not. I had the time in the studio and I had this music that Jack was bringing me and the band was bringing me. And we ended up writing an amazing album and we're still doing this. So I think that when you're feeling uninspired, you have to try to take all of those thoughts out of your head of what are people going to think? Is this going to work? And you have to just trust in yourself and trust that what you're doing is going to be for the best. So let's see here. I'm going to answer a couple more and then I'm going to kick off this thing and let you guys go back to whatever it is you're doing. I'm just kind of waiting for something cool to come through. Okay, what's the meaning behind the album cover? That's really good. I like that. Honestly, so the original artwork was a completely different thing. It was like this weird, like alien looking guy that didn't make any sense to me at all. So I had the artist completely redo it based off of some sort of instruction that I gave him. And I told him that I felt like the album was coming out of like a darkness and finding the light in some way. And he came up with the imagery that ended up becoming the album artwork, which I love. It's one of the best pieces of art, I think, that band has generated as far as album artwork goes. I really like to look at it. It's simple, but it's like really cool. I love all the colors. I love the white, black, and the red, and I love like the little tree that's on fire in the distance, and it just kind of, I don't know, from something that literally came from such a small fraction of an explanation to that is something that I love for sure. So, good question. Someone wanted to know what song is the most taxing on me to do live. It's weird because as you start to do songs, like when you start an album process and you start playing songs for the first time, they're really, really hard. And then as you get used to singing them more and more, they become a little bit easier for you and you find different ways to perform them live. So in a lot of ways, there's a lot of songs that are taxing on me at first. And Jack likes to put a lot of songs on the set list, which is great because we want you guys to hear as many songs as possible. But that's also a little bit taxing on me because, you know, I'm running around singing, screaming, talking, all of those things. And there's not a lot of time for me to have breaks. And usually me and Nick will hold it down with some acoustic songs in between. So the guys can go off and have 15 or 20 minutes to kind of rest and I'm still going hard. But what I love about it is the ability to be able to build up a tolerance to doing that, to singing consistently and to making hard parts not hard. Like I said, you know, like You Kill Me in a Good Way was really, really tough for me to do at first because I couldn't really hear myself. So I was probably pushing too hard or singing above the note or below the note. But now that I have in-ears and now that I can hear it and I'm used to doing different techniques to get me to those higher notes, it's easier for me to do now than it was back then. So I guess it just kind of takes time and work and practice just like everything else. Just like somebody preparing for the Olympics, singing is the same way. You have to work and you have to figure stuff out. So I'm going to answer 2 more questions, guys, and then I'm going to jump off. What can we expect to see different in your music to come? That's a great question. Right now, I think that one of the differences is that obviously we can't go to a studio right now, so we're going to just be trading material back and forth over the internet. And I think one thing that I am trying to focus on is getting back to that thing that I was talking about earlier with just not caring about the expectation, not caring about the fear of what people are going to think. Obviously, I know what our lane is now. I know what works for our band. So we're going to stay sonically the same, but I'm just talking about writing lyrics and melodies. I'm going to like give myself a chance to not psych myself out or overthink it, but just have fun singing and performing again. And that's what you can expect from future music. Last question, guys. sing the whole album front to back. I did talk to Jack today, and I talked to Cameron, who produced this album, about possibly finding a way to rework some of these songs and, see if there's a way to do some trading back and forth while we're home. I'm not going to promise anything, but it would be cool to maybe have this opportunity to kind of re-record some things and set ourselves up to doing some sort of tour in special areas or whatever, where we could play this album front to back and it could make sense for us now. And if that does happen, I'll let you guys know. We'll just kind of see what goes on. But it would be a lot of fun. So, all right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I know that times are weird right now. Anytime that I can hop on here and just kind of ease the boredom or the anxiety, I'll do my best. This was a really cool opportunity. I wasn't even planning on doing this, but because of the album and what it is right now, I thought it was a really cool podcast episode. And like I said, I'm working on editing them. I have 4 episodes done right now. I'm going to start sending them off to my managers so that they can get them in the right place. And I'll let you know when the podcast will be available for you to listen to. Shout out to everyone that's been listening. Shout out to the fans and the friends at home. We love you so much. Thank you for all your support. We'll see you again next time. Take care. Until then, peace.